What's going on, everybody? Luca here, and today we are going to be discussing The Pale Blue Eye here on Myth, Magic, and Movies with Dara Sanders. This was a movie that came out on Netflix, and this involves murder at West Point Academy, one of the most prestigious military schools in the country, and it's set in the 1820s, give or take. And we are graced with the presence also with a young Edgar Allan Poe. So, sit back, relax, as we do our review of The Pale Blue Eye here on Myth, Magic, and Movies. I'll just do the intro later. I just want to go and dive right in, just because there's a lot to talk about. So it's funny because because I've seen the movie The Pale Blue Eye 3 times, and you've now seen it 3 times as well, which is pretty funny. But what I really love about this movie is the fact that you're taking elements of reality and kind of incorporating into this fantasy narrative, mainly with including Edgar Allan Poe, who would be considered the father of the modern American detective fiction, right? Because he was writing in the 1830s, 1840s, probably like 40 years before Conan Doyle would come onto the scene with Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
And what I really love is the fact that you have all these little, anyone who's a Poe fan or anyone who's familiar with Poe can see sort of bits and elements of his stories kind of sprinkled throughout. The big one being C. Auguste Landor, who would be the prototype for C. Auguste Dupin, famously the Purloined Letter and Murders on the Rue Morgue. Now for this movie here, The Pale Blue Eye, I wanted to take a look at this because a lot of the stuff that we've reviewed so far has been pretty modern. So we've already looked at series
True.
1 and 2.
Nothing. Well, we've seen some period stuff, right? In a sense, right? Because
Yeah.
we saw Bridgerton, and eventually, I don't know when we're going to do Queen Charlotte, but this is on another level when it comes to a period piece, right? Because you have to kind of add in the atmospheric nature of the film. It's very dark. It's a very dark film. And also what I noticed, I think the second time maybe, and then the third time as well, the camera shots, all the overhead camera shots were so fascinating to me, especially as it looked out over the waterfall, which has, meaning we'll discuss, but, really getting a landscape of the campus and all the surrounding areas. It was just fascinating to me. It was so much more of an outdoor film, which is odd considering, right? Like
Right.
that. Yeah, it was interesting to make that choice. But yeah, that's one of the things I noticed. And the other thing, and we don't have to get into this now, but what I noticed the third time I watched it was when the captain approaches him in like the second scene of the movie,
Right.
says, we're going to need your assistance. I need you to come down to the station. He's being very vague, very cryptic. We don't know what he's talking about. And Christian Bale's character, Langdor, is like, what's going on? Did they find me out? Right? Like he's like, because he says, do you mind if I don't come? And so like, he's completely like, they found me already. Right? Like that's his demeanor, like at that time, which I didn't notice before.
Right.
The first couple times I saw it, but I thought that was really interesting. And then they kind of get into, of course, his backstory to a point. But, they kind of, throughout the movie kind of interlay kind of his grief, right? Like, so it's kind of amplified. And so you understand his state of mind, I think. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because it does follow, the typical Poe narrative where the narrator or the protagonist is suffering some sort of darkness, and they kind of descend deeper and deeper into madness as the story progresses. I mean, the big one being the Telltale Heart, for instance, where the narrator at first seems very calm and very collected, but but there's that one little thing, that little beating, heartbeat that just keeps reverberating over and over again, and it slowly drives him to the edge. And that's what we see with Landor, Landor comes off as very calm and collected at the very beginning. Well, I would say the very beginning, but like, you know, the
But
early scenes of
actually,
the movie.
I would say most of the film. I would say I didn't realize what his true mindset was until he had the showdown with Cadet Poe.
Mm-hmm.
And Cadet Poe kind of says to him, and I don't know if we want to get into this, but he does say to him, like, you could have come to me, right? Like, you could have sought my counsel. I would have helped you.
Well, it's pretty interesting too, because it's a reversal of what we saw, you know, in earlier scenes where
totally.
Yeah, where you know, Poe kind of comes to Landor, really. So it's kind of like, because everything about this movie, what I like is the fact that everything kind of meets its own conclusion, you know,
Right,
in a
right.
way. But I do want to start off because the movie is set in 1830 in upstate New York, near
Right.
West Point,
Right.
and it centers around what appears to be a hanging by a cadet. And you know, the academy, being the academy, decides to consult August Landor to investigate. What
Right.
did you think? What did you think of the premise for that?
So, like, you know, just kind of starting off, and I went in with this cold. Obviously, I've seen it a number of times since, but I went in with this cold. So whenever it's a period piece, I usually don't expect a garden variety kind of homicide that you find in some of like the more modern British TV series. So
Yeah,
I think seeing the hanging, you think something associated with the school, right?
Mhm.
And so like that's the first thing I think. You know, the movie gives the Langdor's backstory in that he has a very successful record as an investigator, right?
Right.
Like that's what we know. So he's brought in for these difficult cases that confound them. And we find out early on, I would say, Luca, that these people like the doctor may not be on the level, right? Like because he misses something early on. Because what we learn is that Fry has died, but there's confusion around if he hanged himself, or if there was some type of struggle because of the marks on his neck. And then we learn his heart was taken.
Well, don't forget. Well, don't forget, because he also discovers the contusion in the back of his head, which would indicate like he basically got bonked in the head, and then that happened.
Right. So like it's almost like from this point in the film, we initially think this is, of course, the work of one person, right? Like, and then we now think sadistic killer. Why are you taking a heart out? Right. Like, so that's kind of the introduction to it. So this to me is a different type of murder mystery, because now we have like kind of elements of the occult, right? Like what, you know, why are you taking the heart out, right? There's some kind of sacrifice ritual. There's something going on, right? That's what you're thinking.
Well, not to mention too. I mean, this is also taking place at West Point Academy, right?
Right.
So it's more of a heightened sense of danger, you know, because of the fact that the killer isn't really going after average civilians like you would see in a city or in a village. You're going after people who are supposed to be the best of the best. You know, because when you think of West Point Academy, you're thinking of people who are going to be commissioned to, land top jobs, in the army, right? I mean, we're talking about an academy that's produced people like, Grant or Patton and all these big names. So the fact that someone's going out there and, eliminating these, definitely adds a level of danger to it.
It does add a bit of danger. So like we go on I'm on this journey with quote unquote Christian Bale, right? Like as he investigates, right? There's no kind of indication to me that, I mean, like, I think one of the first things I thought whenever there's a period movie or a period series is what elements are available to investigate? How will this investigation take place? Is this witness-based? Is this, likely not completely evidence-based? Like what, so like, to me from there, the movie goes in a lot of different directions in terms of like the characters and kind of their backstories. Kind of, I don't know how else to say it, but like it goes in a lot of different directions. There's kind of a lull, between the first killing and the next killing, right? Like
Right.
there's a pretty big gap there. And within that gap, we kind of learn more about the characters as that happens. And
Let me ask you this: did you appreciate the fact that they weren't going crazy and just turning into a huge, murder spree? They're actually pretty conservative and how many, murders there were, in that
in the
movie.
movie, I thought that was curious, right? Because
Okay.
let me tell you why, as a purveyor of true crime, as well as like anything procedural, murder mystery thriller,
Yeah.
everything like that. Typically, that type of crime where the heart is taken is evidence of some type of serial killer, right? Someone
Yeah.
that has a plan in mind and wants to execute it. And so typically it would not be this gap that you had in the movie. So I think I don't know, I think I got distracted from the mystery part, meaning the murder that took place, because it seemed to shift gears a little bit. It focused more on like the backstory of Poe as well as Langdor, and the introduction of the grief he's feeling as we see these images of his daughter and his emotion when he recalls it, right? So there's something bad there, but you just don't know what.
Right. You haven't connected the dots yet.
Right. And then we know that Poe is someone who's lightly picked on, I would say, but he has some kind of constitution within him, right? Like some kind of confidence within him, I would say, to a point. But he's such an interesting character. I've never seen that actor, and I can't recall his name. I can't think of what else I've seen him in, but
I was gonna say, if you remember the Harry Potter movies, he played Dudley, Harry's cousin.
One day when I have 4 or 5 days, maybe if the government shuts down, I'm just going to go hard and watch all the I've not seen the Harry Potter films.
He has grown up since then. But he looks uncannily like Poe. Like when you compare it,
he looks from the period.
Right.
The other part, which I think is also important. When you have actors that are playing in period roles, that they do look the part. And so I think at that point, to me, there was kind of a switch in the characters themselves versus kind of what they're kind of focused on. It was like their lives. That's kind of how I switched after that first murder.
Right.
Because there was frustration at the top. Like, what are you doing? Why hasn't this gotten done? What are you looking for? All this stuff. So yeah, it was, because it's not a conventional murder mystery. And that's why I say it's genre bending, because it's all wrapped up. And there's an element of the supernatural in this film as well.
Right, because you're tying it into the whole Poe lore of what you see. But let me ask you this. I mean, you make a very interesting point, because it is not a conventional, crime, murder mystery, police procedural kind of movie. Do you feel it kind of worked in its benefit, or do you feel like it kind of took away from what you're expecting out of these types of movies, like what you would see with Sherlock Holmes or Poirot or anything else?
Right. So that to me is all about expectations. And I know as a cinephile, right, I know Christian Bale doesn't take regular roles, right? Mm-hmm. So at that point, what I'm thinking is this is something a little different. That's not to say that I'm disappointed, really, because like I said, I really didn't look that much up on the film. I thought that would be a disservice to the viewing experience to do that.
Right.
So I just didn't. So I just watched it. But I will say, when I watched it the first time, as it goes into like this character study part, there was a lull for me where I kind of became a little disinterested.
Right, you kind of have to force yourself to
I think
follow along.
I think
Yeah.
I had to force myself because it
Yeah.
kind of goes off on a tangent that's, while like not wrong in the sense that it does flow with the movie, it just kind of lulls you a bit. And you're just like, yeah, whatever. And it's a dark film, right? And everybody's in the snow, and it's just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah,
Right?
it's very slow paced too, because
It is slow paced.
because another thing you got to keep in mind too is because we've done reviews of both series 1 and 2 of Line of Duty, right? So we've kind of been conditioned to sort of expect fast paced, sexy, action driven kind of crime drama.
Right.
But we got to remember that what what we're used to wasn't the norm, like 30 years ago or 40 years ago.
I
So
agree. No, I totally agree. And I know that kind of as we progress throughout further generations, like Gen Z, millennials, all this stuff, you're gonna get people that are so tied to social media, electronics, all this stuff, that their attention spans are like insanely short. And so like a film like this, because we're watching it, it's it's almost kind of like homework. So it's almost like, when you're judging for a film festival and you force yourself to do it, that's why you're watching it. And I don't
it's
know,
kind of
it's
like doing a book report when you think about it.
It is. And so I don't know that I would have stuck it out otherwise. I watched it completely the first time because of your recommendation. And obviously you and I both know this film has a payoff. And it's interesting how the payoff happens, and also kind of the buildup as we know more about Langdor. And one of the interesting things I found with Langdor was every now and then he had the rage that he had came out, and you kind of saw it, right? It didn't come out all the time. He kind of hid it to me to a point. But there were times in the movie where it kind of came out, and I thought it was significant to show kind of what, Poe says at the end about, it was something he did, and I can't remember what, but he says, "Wow, you've surprised me."
Was it the letter or what?
No, it wasn't the letter. I think it was it when he Poe was getting beaten up, right? Because that guy Marquis didn't want him messing with his sister.
Oh yeah. No, I think that was Ballinger who attacked him.
Was it Ballinger that attacked him? Okay, so
because Ballinger and Poe,
right?
Yeah, Ballinger and Poe both. It was hard to miss because it was really, really dark. But Ballinger and Poe both were vying for Leah's affections, right?
Okay, I did miss that.
And yeah. Like I said, that's the reason why you have to watch it, more than one time. But but Poe says something along the lines of, Ballinger also has affections for Miss Leah, but he knows that Miss Leah doesn't want him, so he kind of did what he did because he wanted to kind of discourage Poe from pursuing Leah, because Leah does show some affection. However weird it may turn out.
Right, we don't know how authentic it was, because we know that Poe, she met her untimely demise. Poe was of the feeling that she was a potential wife for him.
Yeah, he even mentions it
like, too. Oh, really? Okay. But, but going back to Poe, when Langdor rescues him essentially, and they're in the bar, and he's like, I had no idea that you had this talent, or you're more scrappy than I thought. Kind of something along those lines.
Right.
And so like for me, I think throughout the film, we're kind of learning more about the investigator, Christian Bale's character, and kind of learning him, and that kind of helps to me set up the payoff at the end. because what we know throughout the film is he's still grieving his daughter. We don't
Right,
know what.
right, because it's very recent too. Like
Right,
he makes that
exactly.
clear. Yeah.
Right. And so, like, that we know because that thread is pulled kind of at points throughout the film. But, like, we don't know, we assume obviously he's lived there, but we don't know anything else about, like, socially his life, except, he has a concubine, so to speak, who he confides in. That we do know about him. But the most interesting part in the movie to me was I think they're in the medical examiner's room, and the captain is there and the superintendent is there. So, like, both his bosses are in there.
Yeah.
And they're talking about him not solving the case and how bad it looks for the academy. And
Right. Right, because they also make it a point like it has to be solved really, really quickly because the people in DC are looking for an excuse to pull the plug on West Point. So,
yeah. And so, like, they mention that to him, and he goes off about these cadets because I think they don't needle him, but they kind of suggest he has something against these cadets and these soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes off and he's like, I don't like what you do to these men when they come to West Point. You make them less than human. And I found that in the third watching so profound, in that whenever you think about what somebody is capable of, it's always easy to dehumanize them, to understand their actions.
Right.
And it made me think about how he feels, like the way he looks at the military academy and how they put themselves. If someone has the audacity to do what those three guys did, right, to his daughter, what would it take for that to happen? If you think of these as ostensibly okay men, what leads that to how does that happen?
Well, I mean, also keep in mind too, because because the captain mentions that they're entrusted with when caring for these young men, turning them into gentlemen, right? So so not only was this a place where men went to learn military science and kind of hone their skills as soldiers, but it also it was also like a finishing school where they can sort of learn how to become gentlemen in high society and sort of climb those ranks, right?
Because I mean, I could totally see that, especially considering we're talking about a time period. I don't know your college, like my college was established in 1819. So I'm just thinking about how many colleges would have been established at that time and what it would mean to go to the military academy, right? Like how that would look.
Yeah, especially if it was West Point, because also keep in mind too. I mean, we're talking about a country where society was heavily prejudiced along class lines, right? So and also it's pre-Civil War. So we're talking about a period where if you could try to rub elbows with the blue bloods and kind of get among their ranks, then do so, because that's how a lot of politicians at that time kind of got their start, and was in the military, and they kind of go from there. That's why people like Lincoln, for example, they were seen as freaks, is because these were people who didn't who've never held a gun or never went to West Point or never did anything militarily. They kind of they were just paying their dues, working as a country lawyer. They weren't doing anything that was going to make them respectable gentlemen of society, where they could just learn how to hold a fork or how to dance or how to behave among members of the upper crust of society, right? So basically, with that point, you kind of start getting it into your head where if you're being fed this idea that we are going to turn you into gentlemen, we're going to turn you into men who could be captains of industry, we're going to turn you into individuals who could one day grace the halls of power in Washington, D.C., you kind of start getting into your head where maybe, people can't refuse me because I'm this. It's kind of like how in the 20th century where if you went to the Ivy League, you were somebody, right?
Right, like yeah, like I think that, and I think that's what Christian Bale was kind of getting at. Like what you're
Right.
doing is really not as admirable as you think. Like what you're
Right.
doing is not really what you think. I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like, you have this goal of turning out these, men that have this, and this, and you're kind of overlooking these damaging elements of this school and like how it affects them, right?
but
Like,
but I would also say, like, I mean, so let's say you take, let's say you take someone who's already messed up in the head, like some kid who,
well, that's yeah, like
yeah, like if you're taking a kid who has like a knack for torturing
yeah,
animals as a as a
disposition, yeah,
yeah, but then you add on to, you instill this idea that, hey, you are somebody and everybody
well,
else around you is a nobody.
exactly.
What we see what happened to Landor's daughter later on, you know, it could be their justification was that, oh, I'm just following what the school is teaching me, because
Right.
it's kind of like what you hear at these military tribunals where, where these guards are saying, I didn't know what I was doing, I was just
Well, yeah,
following orders.
the following orders thing, I misunderstood. I thought I was giving orders to do this. It's really
Right.
crazy when you think back. That's a whole separate topic.
But you can see where I'm coming from with that
But
argument.
I totally can, and that's why I think Christian Bale mentioned it, like, because he didn't have to, but he specifically called out the characters of these students. He says, you think this is a nice and fine institution and it does this, like, you're wrong. You're not doing what you aim to do. You actually are not. I mean, really, like, he kind of calls it out, but I think, and I'm asking from you because obviously I got this recommendation for you, and there was something about the film that you liked aside from the Edgar Allan Poe um angle there. It's a slow burn, right?
Right.
And the film wouldn't be as good without the payoff that we see, because I think that, Luca, and not in a million years did I think that was coming.
Right.
No, seriously. And I'm curious how you felt when it unfolded, because I've watched the confrontation with him and the cadet, I don't know, 3 times now. And he's so, honestly, he does such a good job in that role. But I was fascinated by Christian Bale's kind of response, right? Like, initially not kind of disclosing anything, but also kind of, I don't know how else to say it, showing that he just doesn't give a fuck.
Well, I would say that the payoff is totally worth the slow burn. And what I also like is the fact that when you introduce all these little elements, like the heart being removed, Landor visiting his Robert Duvall, who's supposed to be an expert on the occult.
Oh, the professor guy, yeah.
I thought that was a really, really good misdirection right there, because at that point, the movie's saying, well, we're really looking for someone who is into sacrificing people for black magic, and you actually do get that element with Leah and Artemis in the mill.
But okay, let's explore that, because they're a significant part of like the middle end of the film, kind of like the last.
Yeah, because Poe
3/4 of the film, and now we're looking at the doctor, right, the medical examiner's family, and they're weird as hell, right? Like, off the bat, right? So we know she has health issues. She faints. We know a little bit about the son.
Yeah, the son is so the son is basically. I mean, if you want to think of the arrogant prick from the 1980s movies, he's just like that.
Quintessential arrogant prick.
Right, and he's entitled, and I think he's also the head of some secret society too, because because you remember Landor asks Poe to infiltrate and kind of
Right.
find out what he can, so he kind of ingratiates himself
Yeah.
into Artemis's group to see if they know anything.
But this was the part that I found, and I'm curious your thoughts on it. When the doctor's wife, and I don't remember her name, but
Gillian Anderson.
She's played by Gillian Anderson, but I don't remember her name in the movie.
Yeah.
She asked Landor, "What do you think about my son? Isn't he handsome?" Right? Like, which is like, to me, the first indication. I mean, you can say that, a daughter might be afflicted with something that would cause her to faint. But when they go to dinner and the wife says this about her son, that's when I'm thinking, okay, something's off. Like, was that a red flag to you, or you just dismissed it?
I kind of chalked it down to sort of narcissism, because because the commander of West Point kind of makes it clear near the end of the movie. He's like, the doctor's family is one of the oldest and most respected families in the community, right? So again, when you're in that position, whatever you say or do, you kind of have license to do by virtue of having grandfathered yourself into that society.
Totally.
But I do agree. Like, everything about the family is a bit off-putting, right?
But they had to introduce that, right? Like, so to me, whenever you do a film and you introduce an element like that on an entire family, which is rare, you have to have some indication they're capable of that, like some trigger, something that sets off alarm bells. There has to be something, and I think that's what that was. That was a setup.
Well, what's interesting too is that you're natural, because to your point, you naturally assume it's going to be the son who's going to go off the deep end, right? Yeah. But then, and the daughter, she's kind of like this delicate flower. She's very fragile. Her health is failing. She can't do anything. So you would think, the arrogant jerk, basically the jock, the head boy of West Point, who everybody fawns over,
right?
He's all of this. There's something he's not telling you, but that's why Poe's going to find out. And then you discover, along with Poe, that actually isn't the case at all. Like you thought that he was hiding something. No, he's just an arrogant jerk. Like, there's really nothing.
No, that's it. Pretty much. Yeah. No, that's it.
But I like that misdirection because that way they're kind of playing with you, right? They
are, and it's the trick about, which I actually like. Honestly, it doesn't happen often in films. Again, we get a lot of remakes in terms of films. But I always do like the climax, or the supposed climax,
right?
Where we believe everything has been revealed, and then there's the aftermath, right? And
the denouement at the end,
right? Yeah. And so now we're thinking, oh, it's crazy ass family. That's what we're thinking. And, they worship this ancestor who's hunting witches, all this stuff. And now you're like, okay, interesting. I'm looking at my Netflix, table, whatever, of the time. And I'm like, we have a lot of time left. This is interesting. And that set up my alarm bells. Like, okay, well, this really isn't over. If we have 30 minutes left, this is not over.
But what did you think about that whole misdirection with the whole supernatural angle? Because like you said, this is a movie that isn't just a murder mystery or just a period piece. Yeah. Like, what did you think about them going off of that theory?
I thought it was odd. I thought it was an odd misdirection. It's not like it's so my issue with that subject, supernatural rights, I think it's a bit trite. That doesn't mean it didn't happen or wasn't common or isn't fair to put in the film. But I felt like that misdirection was it was odd, that misdirection.
I agree with you, but I will say this. It was one of those things where they just mentioned it and left it alone. They didn't kind of beat it with a dead horse where they had I mean, if they started having like corpses of the dead cadets walking around, I would have taken issue.
Right.
But the fact that they decided to just mention it and kind of like drop little hints, that was palatable because they weren't going to like, you know, one, they wanted to keep it as real as possible. So obviously
Right.
they want to play into the notion that people at that time, even though it was supposed to be even though they were modernizing as a society, they there was still room for belief in the supernatural. But at the same
Right.
time, they want to present this as a possible theory, but not really harp on it or kind of drag it out too much.
Yeah.
So
I
I
mean,
give them credit for that.
yeah, I think that's fair. It was almost like a one-off situation. It was very weird. Because like he's like all in. And it's funny, I thought that, because after that we get, 30 more minutes of movie time, but I looked at it as like he's been betrayed by, what's her name, Leah, I think.
Yeah.
He's been betrayed by Leah, but he is still revering her as he's speaking to Christian Bale at the end, which I found so odd. And I don't know, like one of the things I kind of keep going back to is his character. And like, do we see him as this kind of moral detective, so to speak? Like that's his trajectory kind of in the future, is like he's always doing what's right. Because to me, the ritual, his participation in the ritual thing seemed out of character. Was he just doing this through love? Like what?
Or talking about or who are you talking about? Poe or Artemis or who?
Poe. No, Poe.
Oh, Poe. Okay. Yeah. I mean, he is genuinely like smitten with her. He loves her. It's just
Definitely.
it's just one of those things where it's like, sometimes it's better to kind of figure out where is she going, kind of get to know her a little bit more before you kind of go all in. But I was thinking, because you remember that old what was that old axiom that Sherlock Holmes always said? Whatever the truth is, however bizarre it may be, must be the conclusion.
Whatever the result, however crazy it may seem, must be the truth. I mean, but it plays off Occam's razor, right? Like
right. And that's what I was thinking here, because to your point, even though the supernatural angle or the human sacrifice angle might be a bit odd, to the movie's credit, because we are solving the mystery alongside Landor, we do have to present that as a possible theory.
Right.
Which I will give them props for. But to go back to your other point about Poe, I think the big weakness he has here is the fact that he allows himself to get wrapped up in that romance with Leah, because he's because he's supposed to be keeping tabs on Artemis, but somehow like he kind of gets distracted and he sees Leah and it's like, oh, like what's going on with her, and he unwittingly kind of ends up discovering like she's really the mastermind, or not the mastermind, but the prime cause for all of this.
And that's what kind of confounds me about his character, because we see him throughout the film, especially at the end. This is a smart guy, right? So was he just wrapped up in her?
Well, he is a poet, as he said himself. So poets by nature are very romantic. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility for him to be smitten with the lady. Yeah. But what I will say too is the fact that the misdirection also works because because Leah, being a very delicate person, obviously we cast suspicion off of her, because when you look at her and you see how she interacts, you would think there really is no motivation for her. Like she was behind all of it.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. And the thing that's interesting to me, because we might as well get to the ending here.
Yeah.
At this point, you, Luca, who's watching this for the first time, you're thinking what when they meet up? What are you thinking?
So when I see that last scene where he's like tied up, I'm thinking, okay, so the theory does pan out. The thing that kind of confused me though was the fact was how Fry kind of fit into the thing in the first place.
Right.
That's the one thing that kind of made me
Fire
scratch my
thing.
head.
Okay. So after the fire thing happens, you're like, I still have questions.
Right,
Okay.
right, because I will say this, like what we see at the end, where everything is revealed, right?
Mhm.
You kind of get the feeling, okay, I mean, some things don't really make sense, but
Right.
but they've established the family is a bit kooky. They've established that they're willing to resort to archaic practices to kind of accomplish a goal. I I can reasonably accept this. Like it doesn't make a ton of sense. I do have some
Right.
questions, but
Right.
it's like a 70-30 kind of
So
deal,
okay,
right?
so your feeling was I'm fine with it wrapped up at this point.
Right,
Right.
because of the whole ritualistic killing.
Right.
First with Fry's heart being missing, and then the dead animals being killed and impaled all over, I guess all over campus, and then Ballinger being killed. I mean with Ballinger's death, you could sort of say Artemis kind of feels like Ballinger was being a bit of a prick, and so he decided to kind of take him out of the picture or whatever. So
Okay.
it kind of makes sense. But yeah, but like I said earlier, I mean there are, like, when you actually begin scraping back everything else, you begin to ask yourself, well, how does Fry fit into this?
Right.
Because Fry's death kind of kicks off the whole thing, and we've already established that what happened to Fry wasn't really what we thought it was. It was actually murder. So so
Intentional, targeted, blah blah blah. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So in my mind, when I see there's like 30 minutes left, I'm like, oh, good. They're gonna hopefully there's gonna be like something more substantial behind it, and then.
Okay.
But
Right. So
what did
yeah,
you think?
let's set that up though, because now poor Poe, Cadet Poe has been, I don't know, I think they tried to take something out of him. So he's been in the hospital. He was recovering for a while and he goes and visits Langdor.
Yeah.
And for me, like, I didn't think anything of it other than typically in movies, there's kind of a wrap up goodbye situation. And that's
Hmm.
honestly the most I thought was going to come out of it. Like the end of the film when he's visited, when Langdor is visited by Poe, my thought was this is just kind of a wrap up.
Right. It's kind of him just saying, oh, I just want to thank you again for saving
Yeah,
my bacon, all of that.
recommended me, blah blah blah. Like that's honestly, that's kind of all I thought.
Yeah. So when he like explains, as I was late, as I was out cold, like, or as I was in bed, I was thinking, and then everything begins to turn. And by the way, it all kicks off with that note that they discover it from the very beginning,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which I thought was perfect because it kind of fits into who Poe is as a character, and it kind of fits into the whole mystery, because that because the body itself just hanging there. I mean, people would dismiss it, but that note kind of adds another element to it,
Right,
you know.
right,
So when he had that denouement where Poe kind of explains what his thoughts are and explains
right.
what he thinks might have happened, you begin to wonder, like, is Poe kind of like messed up in the head too? Like, is he just going there to like screw with him, like, just
Yeah.
because, or what? That's what I thought initially, but then you come to realize Poe isn't making this up. Like, it's almost as if he was there, really.
Right. And so that's what's so interesting to me, because Poe, as you see when he starts talking to Langdor, is he's done his due diligence. At some
Mhm.
point, there was something that set him off.
Well, he's doing his due diligence throughout the movie. That's the thing.
Right. But I'm just saying, for him to go to the only person that would likely know, right, the concubine of Langdor, and say what happened to his daughter.
Hmm.
And so that's really the only way he would find out about it. And finding out about that was kind of the first step for him understanding what kind of motivation the killer would have to kill Fry and Ballinger, right? Like, so to me, that was first of all, amazing due diligence on his part. And like, it opens up like, so like typically when you have movies like this, and I know you've watched a ton of movies, but I honestly think these types of movies I've probably seen more than you.
Mm-hmm.
And typically what happens is whenever there's like a setup or a reveal, there's been foreshadowing.
Right.
Something that they put in the film, but it was really, really hard to pick up on it.
It was really minute. Yeah.
Right. And so to me, there was no foreshadowing of this. Do you think in the beginning, there was a point in the beginning where he kind of reaches for his daughter? That's the only thing I can think of.
I mean, I think I'll say this, like, I think that we do see some foreshadowing, him just thinking of his daughter, mentioning about it. I think there was at one point where Poe visits him at his home, and he finds Byron, and he unwittingly discovers his daughter's necklace as a result. And you could sort of see Landor kind of getting all not jumpy, but he kind of kicks into that, paternal instinct.
Yeah.
And also the way the way that he treats Poe. I mean, he treats Poe very differently than the way the other cadets treat Poe. There's more of like this fatherly way that he treats.
Yeah, definitely respect there. Right. Totally, for whatever reason. Right.
But you also kind of get the feeling that Landor isn't, because for me it wasn't it. For me, it wasn't a question about Landor's competence as a detective, right? Because you alluded to this earlier. I would say it's just more of his motivation, really. Because if Landor wanted to, he could have solved this, pretty quickly. But it's dragged out.
Right.
And what's even more interesting,
which kind of like in and of itself, that itself is a tale. It's a tale because when the captain lays out all the things that he had done, right? Like his CV, so to speak, all the investigations he has done, you're thinking this is a top-notch dude. And
he gets results done. Yeah.
Right. So you have this crime now, weeks and weeks, and we don't have any leads, any suspects. Might be a tell in and of itself.
Right, because then that would be an indication because then you start asking yourself, well, if you've been able to break up gangs and like solve these mysteries in record time, and you've been hired by one of the most prestigious institutions in the country,
right? Exactly.
Then surely this would motivate you to kind of get this done a lot quicker.
Yeah.
And when you see what happens at the end of the movie, you kind of say to yourself, well, it kind of makes sense, because if he was going to solve it, then he would just go up to the captain and say, I'm the one who did all of this. Like, that's how you solve the case. But it's very par in the course for what we've seen in other other productions. Like, because I mentioned to you there's a Soviet movie from '78 called A Hunting Accident, which follows a very similar premise where a guy, where a country lawyer presents a manuscript to a publisher, talking about about the death of a noblewoman. And then the publisher comes to find out that the country lawyer was the one who was responsible for the death in the first place.
Interesting.
And then anyone who's a Poirot fan, the murder of Roger Ackroyd is another one too, because the narrator is talking about Poirot investigating this murder. All you come to find out, the narrator was the murderer this entire time. So something like The Pale Blue Eye, I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, obviously there were some elements that kind of made me scratch my head. I know because I know because there were three guys who perpetrated the crime. Fry and Ballinger definitely met their end, and then the the third guy vanishes. Like he just
but he also said specifically, I just don't have the energy to go after him. Like Lucas Stoddard, I think was his name, but like he knows who he is. He can find him, but he's so drained. And that to me was very telling when he said that. He just said, I don't have the energy to do this again. Like I'm done. Like I'm out of everything. I'm just completely dead inside. And that's how I took it.
Yeah. But what did you think about the whole detective being the murder premise? Like did you enjoy that angle, or
it's really Luca detective being the murderer is very rare. I saw, and I hate to be this person, but this Eastern European TV series I saw, I think it was called The Ten Commandments, but if not, I'll send you the title of it. But it was about a serial killer, I think similar to Seven, the movie Seven, where he was killing under all these different sins.
Right.
And it was weird because as I'm watching this, I think it was like Romania, Estonia. That was one of them. As I'm watching this, I'm just like, this is weird. They're investigating this, but something's weird. And it was one of those shows where they don't do the initial reveal, which they could do. They wait till about, I think, midway through the series, where they reveal and confirm the police officer is the killer. And it was just because this is a modern show, police procedural show.
All right.
And it was shocking as heck. Like I said, I'll send you the link once I find it. It was very shocking. This one to me was not as shocking. Only because understanding, like if you even looked at the character at all, as well as like his, I don't know, like energy, like urge to solve the crime. And like he just seemed to be like done with the world. Like I don't know how else to describe it. Like
he's jaded. He's tired.
Like he's so done with like people suck, everything sucks. Like that's his mindset. So in that respect, once kind of the analysis from Poe that we get, we're just like, yeah, that checks out. That checks out. Yeah, that checks out too. Like, and he's just responding as if, okay, yeah, whatever. Like, cause when he offers him that moral lifeline where he's like, you could have come to me, I would have comforted you. And he's just like, it wouldn't have worked.
Right.
He said,
although he did say, I wish it was you that my daughter had run into that night,
Right. Like I would have preferred you as family, which I'm sure, right? Like, yeah, of course. But like, yeah, that's, and then just going back a bit, we learned before we're introduced to the crazy metal examiner's family, the wife inquires about his wife because she wonders, well, she died of a sickness. I hope it wasn't a long sickness. And he was like, not short enough or something like that.
Right.
So that was another indication of the additional pain that he's felt, right? Like, so now, that's just with his wife. So now his daughter dying, now he's like completely done with everything.
Right, because he's lost his connection to the world.
Right. And they say to him, Luca, they say, we're gonna limit your drinking, right? Remember?
Yeah, and then he goes, the next thing he goes into the pub and he's like, here's some rules, and he ends up drinking anyway.
Right, he goes immediately.
But what I will say, it kind of it also reminds me of a Sherlock Holmes story called The Adventure of the Devil's Foot, where Cornwall and they're investigating a series of murders, and you come to find out it's a doctor who's been committing all these murders because they were responsible for what happened to his I think his fiance, and Holmes has the chance to turn him in, but then he's like, I'm not going to say anything to the police. Go finish the rest of your work, and I won't bother you. And Holmes even says, had I loved, as much as, as dearly as this man did, I probably would have done the same thing. So you could so in a way, you could sort of sympathize
Okay.
with Landor's
You can,
motivations because,
yeah. And I have to bring up, now that you mentioned the show you mentioned, the Sherlock Holmes, I have to mention a TV show and season that we're probably going to have to dive into because it has the same thread running through it. Whether these people that you're investigating should be charged with murder.
Mm-hmm.
And the show is Unforgiven. It's a modern show. It's still going on. It's on the BBC. It's on PBS Masterpiece. It's Unforgiven season 2.
Oh, I think you mentioned this
a
while ago. Okay.
And I don't know why we did Line of Duty before doing this, because every time I talk to somebody, I say, I want you to watch this season. And it's the best season of television. It's in my top 5. It's probably number 2 because there's always one that you forget. But it's in my top 5 of best seasons of a show I've ever seen, because each season is an anthology series, right? Like, it's a different case, but it's so profound, especially morally, that it's one of those things where you're just like, I totally get it. And and that's another thing, Luca, when you have these shows or movies where you find yourself siding with the murderer.
Right.
Right.
And that was, well, I was going to say because murder mystery movies like Pale Blue Eye or Unforgiven, the reason why they're so fascinating is the fact is that they're not black and white. It's not like Line of Duty where AC-12 are the good guys, and then Tommy Hunter is the bad guy. It's very black and white. Here it's operating in the gray area where it's like, do we really want to sympathize with the police on this one? Like, if I was in the same position as a suspect, I probably would have done the same thing too, because if you really do care about somebody, if you really do feel strongly about this, you are going to respond in a similar manner, and the fact that Sherlock Holmes himself would say something similar, it kind of lets there really isn't that much of a delineation morality when you think about it, and that's what's so great. That's what's so great about these movies or TV shows is that, just like with Greek dramas back in the classical period, they kind of play out in front of us, so then we can ask ourselves the questions: how far are we willing to go? Like, what are we willing to accept?
And I think that's really fascinating when it comes to murder mysteries, right?
Yeah.
Like, Columbo. Every now and then, Columbo would have a killer where you had some degree of empathy for. But whenever you have a killer overall, where you understand their situation and you're just kind of sort of, I don't want to say rooting for them, but like not exactly pro conviction, blah, blah, blah. It's really, really interesting. And to me, it's interesting in terms of how law enforcement might be seen just in pop culture generally, and how people view them now in terms of taking the side of law enforcement no matter what, versus believing the alleged perpetrator, whatever.
Right, but it would depend on the situation too, because there are because there's some situations where it's like, well, obviously, yeah, you're going to side with the police on this one, whereas other times it's like, I mean, you don't want them to get away, but you kind of feel like at the same time they shouldn't be punished as harshly because of what they've had to go through, right? So with Landor, I feel like I feel like he's, he in a way he's a sympathetic character because he doesn't want to give too much away. He's already having to bury his emotions, in order to solve a mystery at the institution that basically housed and educated his daughter's rapists, and then he has to play this game of presenting one face to the world while
Yeah.
wearing another face somewhere else. And then here comes Poe, who sees through the mask and says, I know who you really are, but I totally get where you're coming from, and I don't judge you for that, and I don't hate you for that. Because because you get the feeling at the end of the day, Poe really, really does care about Landor, and he feels like, whatever his thoughts may be, he doesn't want any harm to come to Landor, and he lets Landor do whatever it is he does. What I'll also say too, about this movie is that it's very, it's not very campy. It's a period piece, but the period piece is it's almost like a second thought in my book.
No, I think that's fair, and I also wonder, as you speak about Poe and Landry, kind of like it kind of reminds me. I'm trying to think of another film it reminds me of, where the protagonist has accomplished what they want to accomplish. They're filled with whatever they're filled with, and they're completely drained. So now it's kind of like a what's next. And that kind of brings me to the last scene of the film, where he's on the top of the mountain and he's reaching out for his daughter.
And he's in a similar pose as his daughter was when she.
And what did you think of that? Because I thought that was very profound, because they don't pan out, they don't pan up, they just end it on that.
For me, I feel like that was him, finally coming to terms with what happened to his daughter. Because even though he tried to help her out as much as he could, he just couldn't let it go. Like that. I mean, it was basically her death that's what motivated him to go and do what he did. So when he finally lets the ribbon fly away and he says, rest my love.
Yeah.
That's him finally coming to terms and accepting it is what it is. I've done what I've done. It's over.
Whatever happens, happens, kind of.
Right.
Thing. Okay.
Right. I don't think he followed the same course as his daughter, but I do think it's him finally accepting what had happened.
Yeah,
right?
That's the thing that I thought was a bit confusing, and I didn't think he would either. Meaning, like
and I don't think he did.
I don't think he did either. But I thought it was curious that they stopped it before you could see kind of the end of that progression. And I thought that was a curious choice in the film to do that.
But I think it works because it wraps everything up. No,
I think it definitely works. No, it definitely does, and it's so to me, the only last thing I would say that I thought was interesting and came to my mind was whenever he would picture his daughter, was he hallucinating? Was he dreaming? How did you see those moments?
I think it was him just sort of like remembering. It wasn't, I don't,
right. Like he wasn't,
I don't want to say hallucination because,
right.
Because hallucination would kind of connote the idea that he's sort of seeing her specter when no one else can. And that's not what this movie is doing.
That's why I asked the question, because there was one particular scene where he saw her or thought he saw her, and then they showed that area again and she was gone. So I was like, okay, they're not trying to show that he's gone crazy, so to speak. Right. He's just remembering her. Right.
So
that to me was kind of important to clarify. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction because you definitely because like I said, I mean, they're definitely playing to that supernatural angle, but they don't want to say it is the supernatural. I mean, again, to go back to the whole to the whole Occam's razor kind of thing, they
Right.
just want to present it as a possible theory, as a possible line of inquiry, and kind of go from there. But they're not going to lay into it and just start taking this movie in a whole new direction. Because as I was watching the movie, I kept thinking they could have added an element that could have taken an entirely new direction. They could have ruined it, but they stayed in their lane. They played their cards straight. They played the movie straight. They pretty much asked the questions and then answered it and wrapped everything up by the end of the movie. They weren't out trying to do anything that was particularly bold or innovative or anything. They just wanted to tell a story.
No,
And
not bold or innovative, but because I think we should mention the source material. This is based on a book, isn't it?
yeah, from 2000, I think 2005 or 2006.
So, that to me is kind of relevant only in terms of what the intention of the book was versus what the movie turned out to be. Because there's look, a lot of times they do change it for a lot of different reasons, right? It just doesn't work, or there are a lot of reasons why the source material might be altered or edited.
Right.
So
yeah.
I can't pull from the source material and say this is what happened. I would have to go to the reviews on Amazon to see specifically what the differences were.
Mm-hmm.
Because depending on when the book came out, or there are a lot of different factors, but certain things you don't translate to film. And so, they almost have to be eliminated from the start. And I wonder if there were any plot points that had to be dumped because it didn't work in a movie context.
Yeah, I will say this: when it comes to murder mysteries, it definitely has like a small cast of characters, which I really appreciate, because that way you're not having to worry about, well, what does this person do? Oh, they just happen to be there in the background. They don't do anything else.
Mm-hmm.
You have a small cast of characters who play their part, and then when their part is done, we don't see them again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Artemis and Leah, they pop in at appropriate times, and then once they get killed in the fire, we don't see the family after that. They've pretty much moved away in disgrace.
And they're essentially referred to at that point, right? Because Landor is talking to somebody and he talks about what the fate of them was, right? So we don't even get reintroduced to them or see what happened in the aftermath.
Right. Yeah. No, I will say this: the introduction of the professor, that Robert Duvall's character, I both liked it and didn't like it. I liked it for the fact that it was there to give credence to that misdirection of maybe this is a supernatural angle, but at the same time, it's was he really that necessary?
I only think it was necessary to introduce their ancestor, which I guess was one of the. That's the only reason I think it was introduced, to kind of make the connection of what the purpose is, kind of, because she's sick, right? So she's trying to get help. So what is this purpose, right? Why are they doing this? Whenever it's a ritual, it's usually for a purpose. They're doing this for some reason. So I think that was why the introduction of the professor was so important.
But here's my thing, right? So,
second, Luca, let me give me 2 minutes. Well, 1 minute.
So before she comes back, I was just going to say, so what I'm thinking in this case with the professor, because the professor does mention that the book is written in French, and he asks Poe, "Do you read French?" And Poe is able to read and extrapolate meaning from the passage that he's reading in that book about the witch hunter. So my thing is that when Poe and Landor are at that party, because it's implied that the medical examiner's family has another copy of that book, it could be you would have Poe kind of uncover the truth as he's snooping around, and kind of eliminate Robert Duvall's character completely, because that way we're not having to add an extra scene or an extra character, and we add another layer that Poe kind of discovers over the course of his investigation, because at that point, as he's reading the passage, he comes to find out, oh, there is more to this family than meets the eye.
But that's the interesting thing to me, though, Luca, is I'm seeing Poe as an intelligent person that is not easy to be taken advantage of.
Right.
And I think that's where that's one hole in the movie that I can't get around, how he ended up as the sacrifice.
Well, I mean, keep in mind too. I mean, Poe, is human just like the rest of us, and and he did mention he is a poet, and poets by nature are very romantic. So, I would say like, I would say he could be forgiven for the slight misstep, because he does have affections for, and we are talking about a young man who hadn't had an easy life, and he's been picked on by everybody.
We do know that. Yeah, I mean, we do know that, and he did in a way that is not common for men that are kind of early on in that stage of relationship development, whatever.
Right. And we know Poe would not have a military career because he gets kicked out of West Point.
Well, yeah. But so there's that connection that he seems confident with her, which is interesting as well. So like, I don't know, that whole kind of segue in the film is just fascinating to me. It's a lot to unpack, I guess.
I mean, I mean, did you feel like it was distracting? Do you feel like he could have just...
Not distracting. I didn't feel like it was distracting, but I did feel like it was a ruse, right? Like they definitely used that to kind of put to bed, we're going to combine the murder and the carving of the organs, and we're going to say this is a ritual killer, and we're going to place the blame on that. And you said you were like, I don't know, it kind of makes sense to me. It made sense to me. So like when it came that Poe went to visit Landor, that to me was shocking. That when I saw it the first time, that scene was shocking.
Right.
Like not even picking up a hint of it. The only hint I could pick up, even by the third watch, and I don't know if you agree, is that Landor was grieving. And he was in I don't give a fuck mode. But we didn't know that his daughter was raped and she committed suicide. So we didn't know those two elements, which would understand like his actions, which we come to learn. But usually there's some kind of foreshadowing of what's going to come. And there was none, unless you saw something.
So do you think they could have benefited by adding more elements or more scenes to kind of, put us in the loop? Okay.
I think so. Like, I'm not upset that it came out of the blue, but I do like when a director treats his audience as kind of a certain level of understanding, right? So like they'll introduce some kind of plot device, something to kind of introduce like some kind of foreshadowing like of what might come. Right. I feel like that's the norm versus a rare occurrence. And that's an issue I have with The Pale Blue Eye, that there was no indication this was going to happen. And so it was almost like, if you believe that when you're watching a detective film, you're along for the ride as an investigator as well, and that you'll encounter clues that will help you understand what's going to happen later, this Pale Blue Eye is not for you. In that, I I don't know how you could have known what would happen at the end. I
Yeah.
I really don't know how you could have even known that would have happened. I just don't think so.
I mean that's fair, but also at the same time, I would add that it kind of puts everybody in equal footing because Poe, initially, was unaware of it, just like we were unaware of it,
Right?
and in that way, when we get that reveal, it's like, oh wow, like I did not see that one coming. And to what we mentioned earlier, I mean it's obviously a slow burn of a movie,
It is.
so it's one of
Right.
those things where you kind of have to hang in there. But when the reveal comes, yeah, it's shocking, and you might have a bit of it. Some people might have a bit of an issue with how it's presented, why was it foreshadowed or hints weren't dropped throughout the movie. But at the same time, it's like you kind of feel like it's a surprise that you didn't expect, but it's kind of a welcome surprise, really.
It that's fair, I think, because if you look at it in the context of how are you if you're going to critique what my argument was, how are you going to foreshadow that his daughter was raped and that she killed herself?
Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Right.
Yeah.
So how can you foreshadow that really?
I mean, if you think about it, there really is no, good way to kind of foreshadow it.
No, I don't think you can. So what you do is you focus on his grief and you focus on it more and you try and bring out the rage he has in scenes throughout the film. Because
Right.
I think that that's one of the things that makes you believe he's capable of doing what he did. Because what he did was a lot. Because when he killed Ballinger, remember, because they said the carve out wasn't as precise, so
Yeah,
he
it was kind of
the
rushed.
heart himself, huh?
It felt kind of rushed compared to compared to what happened with Fry.
Exactly. So like that's him not being the expert, so he's trying to do it. So yeah, like I kind of understand some of the moves they made. I just don't know, because if I'm critiquing that, now I'm saying I want a completely different film, which I don't think is fair.
Right.
So I'm not saying that at all. I think that the payoff was great in that it was shocking. It wasn't intuitive, right? Like it wasn't something that you would say, yeah, like, yeah, they indicated that by this, this, and this. It's more like, I understand that. That makes a lot of sense. So like in that way, you kind of understood his actions. So in that way, I think the payoff was fine. In that there was no foreshadowing, but I'm okay with the rollout, so to speak.
Right.
I was okay with how they did it.
Well, another thing I wanted to ask you too, because because it's something that I was thinking about as I was watching the movie. Did you feel Christian Bale, perfectly executed, the role that he was asked to play, or do you feel like there were certain elements where maybe he could have, played up, the anger more, or maybe he could have toned down,
Totally. I think he could have played it up more, and I think he was way more passive than he should have been in the film. There were instances where it came out, which I assume it came out because of the script. I don't know whose prerogative it is once it becomes like who's, if the actor says, I think we should do this versus the director or whatever. But they kept it at a minimum. And I think that the only fully fledged character that I appreciated was Poe because of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hard not to say like he was the one, right? Like, and it was interesting to me as well, Luca, how upfront he was with, when he talks about his mother, how upfront he was with that to Leah and I think someone else when he brings her up. Like, I thought that was interesting. Is he's like trying to be like, I want you to know everything about me kind of thing.
Yeah, he's an open book. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was an interesting wrinkle in his personality. And I appreciated his story arc and development.
But see, that's why I don't have an issue with him kind of being smitten with Leia. It's because he's such an open book, and he wants to be,
Yeah,
open and honest and form a connection.
yeah,
That what happens later on, where he ends up getting drugged and
right,
nearly sacrificed.
right,
You can say, well, he's a bit of a dummy for doing that, but at the same time, you can understand why he ends up in that
right,
situation.
right. Like,
I
because like there are people and there are extremes on each side that are like, I am an open book, and whatever relationship enter into, anything new, I'm going to give my all, right? So there's like this expectation that you're not holding anything back. And so,
right.
like, for some reason, like, he seemed to feel this duty to do that. Like, I don't know what that was, because it was such, that's Sienna Miller, I think. It was such an interesting role for her, because I think they
Yeah,
downplayed her
yeah. That's not.
makeup, right? So she looked kind of more gaunt, right? Like they
Yeah,
didn't.
that wasn't Sienna Miller. That was someone
Oh,
else.
I
Yeah,
thought.
Lucy Boynton.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I initially thought that was Sienna Miller too. I had to look it up, but
Wow, thank you. I actually thought that was her. Okay.
no,
Wow.
I thought the same thing too. So you're not the only one.
Wow.
But I was gonna say, because with Landor, I felt like I felt like throughout the entire movie, it was kind of like, yeah, whatever, it is what it is. You want me to solve a mystery? Yeah, okay, whatever. It's very passive. So I will say this: by the time you get to the end of the movie, that passivity is justified, right?
Okay.
That makes sense, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
but during the movie itself, maybe don't be so passive. Maybe be a bit more
Right. And
active.
that's the thing, and that was so confounding. It's like, is this a murder mystery? And there was no kind of active. You expect there's like active boots on the ground, investigative, interviews, like all that. There were some, not a lot, like not what you would expect. And that's the other part too that made it less a mystery drama and more of a just drama or period drama with elements of crime and blah blah blah, supernatural
Well,
horror.
it's definitely a character driven
I
story.
think
That's for
it's a
sure.
character-driven story. I agree. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's a character-driven story that happens to incorporate. I mean, to your point, that incorporates the mystery element and happens to be set in the 1830s in upstate New York.
right.
But at the same time, I feel like it works because because murder at a private school isn't too unique in itself, because how many mysteries mystery films have been set at private schools where a student or teacher has
It's
been murdered.
always fun to do
Right.
murder mysteries at private schools because you have
Right.
all these suspects. That's why you have all these suspects. It's so much more fun when you want to expand the suspect list and make it that way, so everyone could potentially have done it. Like, if you want to go that route, it works perfect.
And to set it at West Point too, because because even in the 1830s, they're training men how to be killers, right?
Right.
So when you look at the situation, I mean, obviously West Point, top of the class, elite school where where boys go to become gentlemen, and you have all these little
Right.
cliques that form around.
Of course.
So it's just one of those elements where you could be mined. Now, what I will say, and this is just me speaking here. I don't know how you feel about it. I feel like they could have played more into the whole West Point, academia, dark underbelly of what goes on at the school kind of thing, because
Well,
what they do is pretty tame. It's just Poe kind of gets involved in this little club, and you think they're into like. You think it's like was it the Skull and Crossbones Society? But no, they just sit there, they play cards, and they drink something that's
yeah, it's
expensive.
really silly. And to your point, I think one of the things I thought about when I watched it third time was that we're not really exploring life as a cadet, so to speak, right? So we're
and I wish they leaned into it because I thought that
yeah,
that's
they
pretty
didn't at
fascinating.
all, right? Like, so to me, they didn't at all. We see the mess hall. I don't think we saw, did we see a shot of the dormitories or anything? I
No,
know we saw.
well, I mean, unless you count that scene where this group is meeting up, but even then, it was too dark to tell. So
That's the thing, yeah, and that's the thing. Also, when you watch it in the light, it's very dark to watch. But like, you're not really seeing what cadet life is like, which I find so fascinating.
especially, I
Set
mean, because it's at a boarding school
point,
too.
right? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, so they're there, they're not going anywhere, and you're not showcasing that like at all, like at all,
Well,
right?
we'll also keep in mind too. I mean, it's in the 1830s. They're in upstate New York. It's pretty isolated up there, right?
Very
So I
isolated.
so I feel like they could have heightened the drama of the isolation, right? I never got that sense that they felt like they were threatened, right? It
Oh,
it, it,
totally.
it was more of like, oh, these pencil pushers, they just don't like us at West Point.
Right.
I felt like what they could have done was they could have said there's a madman running around. He's going around killing cadets. The school is under threat. I mean, they sort of acknowledge it when they have the curfew, but even then, it's like you kind of get the feeling no one's taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Because at one point Poe's walking around and the captain's like, "Oh, you're breaking curfew," and then he just like walks off. And it's like, okay, so I guess no one really feels like they're threatened. I felt like they could have heightened the drama by kind of making it very important that that this military school, which is so famous for producing generals, should
I
feel
assume
threatened.
it's the first one, right? In terms of military academies, it's the first, right?
Right, exactly.
Right? Okay.
So to be in a situation where they feel like they're threatened and they're under siege and they kind of have to go into lockdown, they don't know who to trust. I felt like that could have added more drama to it, right? And then Landor kind of, Landor himself is trying to figure out how to navigate like this world of paranoia, because I feel like there are just so many elements where you could have just like heightened the drama and make it a bit more, not terrifying, but a bit more uneasy, right?
Yeah.
But I will say this too. I do like the fact that they shot it in winter. I like the fact that that really
added to it. It really added to it.
right, and really it's almost black and white. My big complaint was the sound quality, because I had to turn up the volume of my computer and everything. I still had a hard time hearing those.
No, I think I did that too. I turned it in the 20s, which is odd because I usually keep my volume at like 15, 16.
Yeah.
But I was required to. Like, and that happens, and Netflix, whatever. But like, being able to see it for free and then you can see it multiple times. I think my issue more than anything was that if I didn't watch it at night and I watched it during the day, there was like an overcast. And so like I could not see anything. It was like I couldn't see anything. It was the oddest thing. So like it was weird watching it in the daytime, which now, we're really late, before it gets dark. So like, yeah, I couldn't see anything.
But I feel it kind of works in its favor too, because I do want to give it a naturalistic look, as opposed to what you see in major productions where everything's kind of lit, even though you would say, well, technically it shouldn't be like that because it's whatever.
Right.
But I want to go ahead and wrap this up. What are your final thoughts on the Pale Blue Eye? Would you recommend this to people, or?
I would definitely recommend it. I think that one of the things that's hard to do when you recommend films like that is to try and tell people to qualify the film. So you tell them, pay attention, or like, don't watch it as you're looking at your phone and things like that. And that's the unfortunate thing about the Pale Blue Eye, that by the time I watched it the third time, I was like, oh my God, Eureka, is that if I had watched it closely the first time,
Mm-hmm.
I would have understood it better. But if you recommend it to someone, how are you going to tell them that? I don't know how you tell them that, but I think you have to tell them that.
Well, the reason why I recommended it to you is because you as a cinephile and and also running a film festival, you're used to seeing films where they're not always going to be fast paced. You kind of have to slow yourself down.
Mhm.
Now, if I was recommending it to a friend of mine, I would probably say maybe watch something like Shutter Island or something else first to kind of get the feel for the pacing, and then jump into Pale Blue Eye. You know what I mean? Because if
The
you
pacing, it's important to talk about the pacing. That's
exactly,
yeah,
and that's my thing, because
yeah.
if you just jump into Pale Blue Eye right off the bat, and you've never had any experience, or you never like watched any movies of that pacing, you're probably going to think this is the dumbest movie ever and I don't understand and I hate it. But if you kind of it's kind of like swimming. You start off in the shallow end of the pool and you kind of have to acclimate yourself before you get to the deep end. Maybe watch Shutter Island, maybe watch an episode of Sherlock Holmes, or maybe check out these first and then kind of
Okay,
go
let's
to Pale
check this
Blue Eye.
out. Which version of Sherlock Holmes would you recommend?
Jeremy Brett.
Okay, all right, we're good. Go ahead.
No,
Okay,
that's it.
No, I'm making sure. I just wanted to make sure.
That I mean that's it.
Amazing. Like,
I promise you next year
oh my,
we'll
he's
dive
so
into it.
great. Oh my God, he's so great.
I mean, you want to talk about the definitive Sherlock Holmes? He is the definitive Sherlock
He
Holmes.
is.
And I will say this: I appreciate the fact that he never wore a deerstalker cap.
Well,
Unlike
how do you feel? Okay, but let me ask you this, because there's different feelings about how much oxygen Watson should take up. In his Sherlock Holmes, Watson was almost non-existent. I mean, yeah, he was there, but he was so like whatever, right? You agree? Like he was. Is that your Watson? Is that how you picture Watson?
I imagine Watson, he's just one of those people who just happens to be there because
Okay.
because I remember reading one Sherlock Holmes story where Watson's like, there are just so many cases that Holmes has solved over the years that I was not involved in, like the Adventure of the Tired Captain or whatever. But the story, but the stories that you're reading here, these are the cases that I think were that were noteworthy to be chronicled and put out there.
Okay.
I don't really take too much of an issue with Watson, just because at the end of the day you're here to watch Sherlock Holmes, really. My only issue is that as Jeremy Brett got older and sicker, they kind of had Mycroft take on the role, and I felt like
that was I don't know what happened. I know what you're talking about in terms of like health issues, but
it was like late 80s, early 90s, like as
but he was so like, when I think of Sherlock, it was so like the I don't know how to describe, like when you describe people that you think are pompous, but in a good way. Is how I describe Jeremy Brett. Like it was almost like unapologetic, I guess.
I mean, he knows he's a genius, so
right. No, but it worked. Like when you think Sherlock Holmes, he is a bit more privileged than the other detectives. Poirot is bougie, is what I would say.
Well, like, Poirot, as the English would say, he's continental.
Right, but he is bougie. Like when he looks at what is the woman and the guy? Oh God, he always looks down on them. But they'll say something to him, and he'll look at them in a certain way. Like Poirot is the bougiest detective I can think of.
Well, I mean, also keep in mind this is something. There's an episode called Halloween Party where he's out in the country and he complains about his feet, and his friend Ariadne Oliver says, well, why don't you just get some leather boots, buckskin boots that's much more suitable than your leather shoes. And Poirot's like, madam, I do not take kindly to your words, and he walks out. Like Well, no. I mean, no. Seriously, like you have to watch the episode. It's called Halloween Party. It's with David Suchet and Zoni Wanamaker. But
Well, I mean, I
that
don't know
perfectly
him.
encapsulates
Other
it.
than him, I know that the guy Kenneth Branagh played Poirot, Murder on the Orient Express. But when I think of Poirot, David Suchet that's the only person I think of. But I really like his interaction with the maid he had, and then the lesser detective he worked with, because
Dude, you're talking about Jap?
yeah. And what was the woman's name?
Well, he had a secretary named Miss Lemon.
Yeah. So like he would talk to them like, I have to put up with you, I have to deal with you, but I really don't want to.
Well, in the books, whenever he's talking to Miss Lemon, he always notices she made a spelling mistake.
I mean, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like